I'm planning a trip with your grandparents. What about you? Any plans? I asked my son, Anthony, after receiving an invitation from my in-laws to join us on a vacation. Well, I have practice. You all should go and have fun, he replied. Isn't this trip a bit unusual? Are you sure you're okay, Mom? I'll be fine. Just work hard at your practice, and I'll bring you back a souvenir. My influence has always fueled Anand's passion for marathon running. He even earned a college scholarship for it, though his university is nearby. He stays in the dorms to save time on commuting, only coming home during long holidays. I knew he could enjoy the trip, but I thought it best to ask. His response was exactly what I expected. I'm Flora, a 46-year-old working woman. My husband, Steve, is 4 years older than me and was once my boss. He's competent, and I respect him deeply. After our marriage and the birth of our son, we created a happy family. Yet, over time, our relationship began to fray. The root of the issue, my in-laws, particularly Steve's mother, who has had a problem with me since the moment we tied the knot and has bullied me ever since. Initially, Steve stood up for me. Living far from his parents, we managed to avoid conflict, but when our son, who shares my love for marathoning, expressed a desire to attend a high school near my in-laws, everything shifted. My son's interest in running came from me. I used to run marathons and still do occasionally. It brought me joy to see him take up running, so I convinced Steve to relocate closer to the school he wanted to attend. For our son's sake, Steve applied for a transfer at work, and we moved. He thrived at his new school and received a university recommendation, so I think it worked out well. Tomorrow morning, go pick up my parents and rent the car on your way back, Steve instructed the day before our trip, leaving me bewildered. Wait, why am I the one renting the car? What are you going to do? I'm exhausted from work and need to sleep until the last minute. Once you get my parents, come back, and I'll take over from there. It's on the way to our destination anyway. I understood his reasoning, but I was even more worn out. Despite putting in the same hours at work, I handled all the household chores. It used to be different. We shared responsibilities equally, but after moving closer to his parents, their frequent visits disrupted this balance. Whenever his mother saw Steve doing housework, she vehemently opposed it. Housework is the wife's job. It's not something the breadwinner should do. Isn't that right, Flora? Her intense gaze overwhelmed me, and I found myself nodding along. This dynamic continued until Steve gradually stopped doing any household tasks. While some blame rested on Steve, I knew his mother had a significant role in it. Gradually, he started echoing her beliefs, occasionally asserting, "I am the breadwinner." By then, it felt futile to fix things, and I lacked the motivation to even try. Over the past few years, Steve changed significantly. His work performance seemed to decline, and he often took out his frustrations on me. I learned that arguing back only led to more trouble, so I chose to accept the situation as the least stressful way to live. The idea of divorce crossed my mind at times. However, I worried about how it might affect our son's college opportunities if we became a single-parent family, so I shelved that thought. Instead, I adopted a mindset of caring for a pet rather than a person, which surprisingly relieved some of my stress. Eventually, I realized pursuing a divorce wasn't worth the energy, and that's how I found myself here. The reason I agreed to this trip was simple. It was to a resort I loved. I knew I could have a fantastic time, even if I ended up exploring alone. Honestly, I was prepared to do things separately from my in-laws and husband if necessary. Perhaps I was invited mainly for driving duties, but both my husband and father-in-law could drive, so I figured it would work out. As I played along with the notion that our pampered pooch was demanding attention, I rented the car as instructed and headed to my in-laws' place. Flora, you're late. Is that the car for today? You should have rented a bigger one. Well, it's better than your tiny car, at least, I replied. The car we typically use is one I bought myself. Since I commute to work, I naturally assume I'd be its primary user. Having paid for it out of my own pocket, we don't venture out of town often, so I thought a compact car would suffice. Plus, I was in love with its interior design and color, which influenced my purchase. Yet, my husband would borrow it without asking, even using it to chauffeur his parents around. To make matters worse, my mother-in-law criticized the car's size, treating me as if I could only afford something modest. I suggested using my father-in-law's car for the trip, but he was hesitant to let anyone else drive it and didn't want the burden of driving the entire way himself. So, we settled on renting a car. However, I wasn't consulted about any of it. I simply found out I was expected to pick up the rental and drive while they lounged in the back seat. It left me tempted to suggest they handle their own transportation. Frankly, they were exhausting. In the end, despite my husband's initial promise to share the driving duties, he slept through the entire journey. My father-in-law refused to drive unless it was his own car, leaving me to navigate the trip to our destination, with my husband's noncing in the passenger seat. My father-in-law incessantly criticized my driving. He nitpicked every move, suggesting turns after it was too late and questioning my choices at traffic lights. It was nothing but needless stress. To make matters worse, my mother-in-law chimed in, disparaging my skills. I found it particularly irksome to be critiqued by someone who couldn't drive herself, especially when compared to my father-in-law, who had been involved in numerous accidents. Despite being told to give up his license, my mother-in-law stubbornly insisted he was merely unlucky and a competent driver. Honestly, I had no desire to be chauffeured by him anyway. I didn't mind taking the wheel, but I wished he would refrain from constant interference. Upon arriving at our destination, my husband finally stirred from his slumber, exhausted from a day in the car. We agreed to my in-laws' suggestion to unwind at the hotel, sipping any outdoor activities. I relished the opportunity to relax, taking a dip in the pool and leisurely exploring the hotel grounds. It was a perfect way to spend the day. After a delicious dinner and a soothing visit to the spa, I returned to our room only to find my husband fast asleep. I wasn't sure what my in-laws were up to in that adjacent room, but they were likely asleep. After enjoying a few beers in our room, I settled into bed, but when I woke to the crisp morning air, my husband was nowhere to be found, and his belongings were missing too. Frantically, I searched the room and even tried reaching my in-laws next door, but there was no response. At the front desk, I learned they had already finished breakfast an hour earlier than I had been told. It seemed they had left me behind. Had my mother-in-law's offer to cover our stay just been a ruse, I had no choice but to handle the checkout process on my own. I settled the bills for both rooms and left the hotel, only to find that there was no car waiting for me. Lost in thought about my next move, my phone suddenly rang. It was my mother-in-law. Where are you now?" I asked, puzzled by the situation. She chuckled in response. "Just enjoying some quality family time since we're on vacation." "I see. But why didn't you all just go together from the beginning instead of leaving me behind?" I couldn't help but ask. "Wow, Flora, you did express interest in joining us, didn't you? That's why we decided to bring you along," she replied casually. I recalled mentioning my desire to visit this resort while casually watching TV with my husband. Was that what he remembered? Typically, it would have been sweet if he had recalled my offhand comments, but this time it felt like he was using it to irritate me. After all, I was the one who had done most of the driving to get here. Why should I be reminded that my mother-in-law, who neither drove nor contributed financially, was the reason I was here? All I could do was sigh in frustration. "Fine then, let's go sightseeing as a family and head home afterward." "You can do some sightseeing too, Flora, and then come back. We're not sure how you'll get back, but you're quite good at marathons, aren't you? Just run back," my mother-in-law taunted, her laughter only adding to my annoyance. "If Steve is driving, put me on speakerphone so he can hear me," I demanded, my anger boiling over. Almost immediately, I heard my husband's voice fill the line. "Good morning. You were eager to come here, weren't you? Take it easy today, but remember, we have laundry from the church to tackle. Make sure it's washed by tomorrow morning." He chimed, sounding cheerful, but any warmth I once felt for him had evaporated. "Do your own laundry," I shot back. "Hey, that's not a nice way to speak. As a breadwinner, I'm advising you to relax today. You should be thanking me," he replied. "Oh, the breadwinner. Don't worry, this will be the last time we see each other." "Well, you've mostly seen me asleep," I countered, my tone flat. "What do you mean?" he asked, clearly confused. "We need to head back home today. There's laundry and house cleaning waiting for us," my husband stated. "Yeah, well, that's exactly why I'm not going back," I replied firmly. "What do you mean?" His voice quivered with uncertainty. "I'm filing for divorce. Remember 6 months ago when you told me you met your soulmate, your childhood friend, and planned to marry her, the one who moved back to your hometown after her divorce?" I reminded him, feeling a surge of emotion. It had been about 6 months since I confronted my husband, sensing something was off, and he confessed he had reconnected with his childhood friend and believed she was his true love. He wanted to divorce me and marry her to support her and her child as a single mother. He handed me the pre-filled divorce papers, but I couldn't bring myself to agree to end our marriage. We hadn't spoken for days afterward, until I realized he needed my help with household chores. Eventually, he asked me to forget his previous words, but I couldn't simply disregard them, and I began gathering evidence of his infidelity. I found myself pondering whether Steve had orchestrated this trip to win me back. The conversation we had occurred roughly 3 months ago, shortly after I quit my job. As I voiced my thoughts, I could hear the surprise in my in-laws' voices on the other end of the speakerphone. It seemed this was the first they were hearing about their son's job resignation. I remember when you announced you were leaving your job, I expressed concern about finding a new one and disagreed with your reasons. Didn't I? I continued, recalling the exchange. You were confident in your abilities and assured me you land a new job quickly. Yet here we are, and you've only managed to secure a part-time position. I can't help but wonder when you'll find something more stable. As Steve remained silent while driving, I seized the moment to lay out my thoughts. I've been visualizing you as a dog to cope with the stress, but then I realized I might as well get a real one. I declared firmly, so I'll be filing the divorce papers. Enjoy your family vacation. My in-laws called out my name in shock, and my husband attempted to say something, but I disconnected the call without a second thought, opting to make the most of my time sightseeing before heading home. I explained the situation to my son over the phone. His response was as simple as, "I told you so." While his reaction was expected, it felt somewhat lighter than I anticipated, given his prior knowledge of the situation. Upon returning from the trip, I made the decision not to go home. Instead, I placed my and my son's belongings in a self-storage unit, preparing for whatever might come next. Armed with only the essentials, I headed straight to a real estate agent. The agent, a woman I had developed a friendly rapport with over drinks and casual conversations, greeted me warmly. As someone from my generation, she was easy to talk to, and I had confided in her about my husband and in-laws, asking her to keep an eye out for available properties just in case. That day, I signed a contract for my own place. With the security of my new home, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and I proceeded to submit the divorce papers at City Hall, where the process went smoothly. Finally, I decided to return the numerous calls my ex-husband had made. "Hello," I began, my voice steady. "The divorce papers have been accepted. We are officially strangers now." Panic laced his voice. "Are you serious about the divorce? I ended things with her. It's just you now. You didn't like me looking at other women, right? Well, now I'm only focused on you. Please come back. You don't have to worry." His words filled me with disgust. "What are you talking about? I never aimed to please you in the first place. You didn't end things with her, did you? You were dumped because you couldn't find a job and had no money." As it turned out, my husband's mistress was friends with the sales representative who had helped us find my new place. What a small world. She had shared her complaints about him, claiming to be his current girlfriend. Apparently, after he quit his job and started working part-time, she saw no reason to stay with him and ended things. "But a fling is just a fling. I'll definitely be seeking compensation," she had said. That's correct. Even though they split, the fact remains that he cheated, and there's evidence. Compensation? I already told you we broke up. It's just you now. At that point, all I could do was sigh. "So you're implying that now that you're single, you're considering another affair? I don't care what you do, but I'm done being taken advantage of. You didn't even notice your belongings were missing from the house because you didn't care, did you? I'm not coming back, so dispose of whatever you don't need." With that, I hung up. Despite my finality, my ex-husband continued to call, and even my former in-laws reached out, but of course, I had no intention of returning to that house. My ex-husband still had found a job, couldn't afford the rent, and had moved back in with his parents. Meanwhile, my ex-father-in-law had continued to drive recklessly, recently crashing into a neighbor's fence with my ex-mother-in-law in the car. Thankfully, no one was injured, but they lacked property insurance and had to borrow money to cover the repair costs. All of this was detailed in the emails my ex-husband kept sending me. I found a twisted sense of amusement in his misfortune. While I didn't respond, I hadn't blocked his emails either, quietly enjoying the spectacle. After moving into a pet-friendly property, I welcomed a small dog into my life and discovered that caring for a pet brought me more joy than caring for people ever had. My son, concerned about my solitude, began visiting on weekends, a welcome change from his previous pattern of only coming during extended holidays. Each day now brimmed with fulfillment. Perhaps this weekend, I'd revisit that resort town for the first time in a while.